Welcome back to Meet the Makers. Today we have another awesome 3D printer with us today. You probably know him from his Hueforge prints that you can see in the background if you're watching on the video version. But super excited to welcome Danny from NeoKoi Prints. So excited to have you here today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So of course, can you just tell us a little bit about how you got into 3D printing, maybe making stuff in general? I know you draw too, so just the whole story of how you got into this.
Back in 2020, I was super into cars and working on cars. I had a Camaro. I actually have another TikTok at No, I'm Dirty Dan. And that was the Camaro TikTok, like where I had started my social media as far as short form videos go. And then that car was involved in an accident. And so whenever I got paid out by insurance for that, I had just a bunch of money. And I was at that point where it was like, okay, do I want to get another project car or do I want to get into a new hobby? And I live in the South, so it's really hot down here. And I was like, I don't want to spend another 2 summers in the garage working on a car every weekend. I started looking around when I was in high school. My high school was given a grant to buy 2 3D printers. And so that was my first taste of 3D printing because I was in robotics back in those days. And so I had always been interested in that. It was a very cool technology. It just wasn't necessarily where it is now, that's for sure, because that was 2013. And so yeah, I started looking on Amazon and saw that Ender 3s are super cheap. And I got an S1 Pro and it got me interested. And then I started printing knickknacks and everything else under the sun and decided to get back into TikTok because I really enjoyed editing videos and doing short form content, making memes and all that good stuff. And then as time progressed, as 3D printers, we can't just have one printer, right? You start to collect more and more printers. So shortly after I got my Ender 3, I got a Bambu Lab P1P, and that was my first look at multicolor printing. And probably a week after I got that printer, I started looking around on YouTube and looking around on model sites like, oh, what can I print multicolor? And then Joel Telling, 3D Printing Nerd, he did a video on Hueforge. And that was the week that Hueforge dropped to the public. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. Printing 2D pictures. Who would have thought that you could do that other than lithophanes, of course. And so, yeah, so I got into Hueforge right away, got super interested, and about 2 weeks into it, I was at the point again where I was like, what do I want to print? It's same song and dance. It's what multicolor print do I want to print? Because I wasn't into AI generation at that point. And then I had a merch business back in 2020, failed merch business, I'll add. And so I had car designs laying around. Most of the cars behind me, those were from t-shirts that I had designed.
Oh.
And I was like, oh, I still have these designs laying around. Like, why don't we throw these into Hueforge? And that's where these guys came from, at least the inspiration to start doing that again. And yeah, just took off from there. I got an iPad again and started drawing again. And it's been history ever since, just been creating and doing all kinds of Hueforges and stuff like that.
Hueforge is like, when I think of you, that's the thing that I know you for. I think it's the thing that most people know you for. And I'm certainly not anywhere near as the level of expertise that you are with Hueforge, but anytime I post a video about it, I always in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, this is old news. People know about it. They like get what it is. But still, every time I post about it, there's like a lot of people who they don't know really what it is, how it works. Can you just like on a high level for maybe people who don't know, explain what Hueforge is and the basics behind it?
Yeah, so Hueforge as a whole, it allows you to take a 2D image and turn it into a 3D print. It uses different methods. It's looking at your images in different ways, and you get to tell Hueforge how you want it to look at it to really bring your picture to life. It uses the opacities of all of your filaments to blend colors. So if you have a really opaque blue, and then you stack like a really transparent red on top of that, and you look at it from above, it looks purple. It's similar to mixing paints in that way, but you're just mixing filaments, and Hueforge takes that into account whenever you're doing this stuff. Whenever Hueforge first started, the guys that were trying it, that's Steve and Ian, was doing it all manually in the slicer. And there's no way in slicers to see the opacities of filaments. So he was making a lithophane and then trying to go into the slicer and just add different color swaps to try to get a desired result. And it was just like almost impossible. And Steve has a background of software development. And then he saw that Ian was doing this and he was like, oh, I could do something with this and I could develop something. That's where Hueforge came from. But yeah, it's a very useful tool for a lot of different reasons. And like you said, with a lot of people still don't know about it. I think a lot of people see on your maker worlds and your printables, they see these AI generated images and they're like, what are these JPEGs? What are these PNG? What the heck is this? And until you actually feel one for yourself, until you actually print one, you don't understand. It's very different whenever you actually feel it and have that in hand, and it doesn't translate to pictures very well.
I completely agree. And I think one of the things I need, a lot of times you look at STL files online and you'll see the rendering of it and it's painted or it's shadowed in a way that it looks so cool. And then you print out like the actual STL. It
It's disappointing.
typically doesn't look that cool. Yeah. Hueforge, that I think for me that like the first time that I printed with it, that was like the surprising thing to me is honestly, it turns out it's cooler, if not cooler, in real life than you think it's going to. And one of the biggest misconceptions that I know I had about it for a long time, and I think a lot of people still know, is that you don't need an EMS, you don't need a multicolor printer to do it. You can run it, only prints at one color per layer per time. So as long as you can pause a printer, you can run a Hueforge print, which I think is super cool. And I hear a lot of people like confused.
That's definitely a misconception. That's one of those things that I've really been trying to drive home on my short form content, is that you don't need the AMS, you don't need an MMU, you don't need a Prusa XL. You can do it on an Ender 3. And when I posted a recent video showing that there were prints done on an Ender 3, everybody was like, whoa, wait a second. Right. I have an A1 Mini behind me, and I've actually been doing TPU Hueforges recently. Yeah. And you can't run TPU through an AMS anyways. So that kind of shows that you're doing manual swaps. But when you're doing manual swaps, you're babysitting a printer. It's not automatic by any means, but it can be done on an Ender 3, but an AMS or an MMU definitely helps. That's for sure.
Yeah, I've yet to run. I have my Enders in my other room over there, and I haven't broken them back out since I moved. But I am curious to run one on there and see how simple it is for a lot of people still have Enders and still love their Enders. So I think it's like a cool thing that you can do it over there. But I've seen you recently do them in TPU, and I was curious about that. I don't run a huge amount of TPU myself, but for you running the Hueforge prints on TPU, how is your experience with that? Have you run into any problems? Is it more difficult, or has it been pretty seamless for you doing those in TPU?
I know stock profiles and some of these slicers are not set up for Hueforge. A lot of them have temperatures that are a little too high, depending on the brand of TPU you're using. Outside of that, no, it's been fine. A lot of people don't think that their 0.4 nozzle can get down to 0.04 or 0.08 layer height, where they can. They're fully capable of it, and that's how you get the crazy detail out of these prints. But yeah, I've got one right here that I just finished up. This kind of really what I'm doing these for. I've got a project where I'm going to show off how you can use that for cosplay, because there are a lot of applications where you can sew patches into a jacket or into some kind of clothing, and then you have this beautiful art on it. You don't have to do, I'm sure you've seen where you take you print out a few layers and then you put that screen mesh down and then you print out some more for cosplayers.
Yeah.
So you can combine the two, and it just adds another way of doing cosplay with 3D printing and show that off.
I haven't actually ever thought of that application before. I feel like maybe something with scales or some kind of texture with that could turn out really cool there. I'm excited to see what you do with that. That's going to be cool. One of the things I haven't experimented with at all on the Hueforge side of things, but I hear you talk about a lot, is I believe it's called a TD1. Can you tell us just more about that and how that works with Hueforge and what people would use that for?
Okay, so the TD1 was a late night idea that came from us hanging out in the Hueforge Discord. If you have Hueforge, you get a Discord link, and there's a bunch of helpful people over there. But one night, back when Hueforge was first becoming public, we used to hang out in there probably every night until who knows when. And there were a lot of late night ideas that went around. And whenever Hueforge was first started, it was very complicated to measure the transmission distance or the opacities of your filaments. There was like a light box way, but to print the light box, you had to print swatches, which let me grab that real quick. I've got a whole box full of them. So you had to print out these little swatches for each of your filaments. And then you could see whenever you would put this down, there was LEDs in a box, and it would, depending on how much light showed through, that would tell you your transmission distance. It's not a bad way of doing it, and it's not a wrong way of doing it. It's just you got to print each swatch, and that takes 45 minutes on a bamboo. And then there are like 3 different ways that we came up with TD, trying to measure TD efficiently and something that was easy for people to wrap their heads around. But then Ajax, the guy who made TD1, he was like, man, I feel like there's got to be an easier way. There's got to be a way with Raspberry Pis and electronics that we could do this, because there are color sensors that you can find super cheap. And sure enough, he was like, hey, look at this. And that was where the first TD1 kind of came from. This is the box. And whenever you insert like your filament on one side. It goes all the way through and it triggers a sensor in here, and it'll show you the transmission distance and the hex code value, the color of your filaments. And if you have it plugged into your computer with Hueforge open, it'll auto-populate in Hueforge. It does it all automatically for you, so you can go ahead and start Hueforging with your filament way quicker than printing out a file. But there's still different ways that you can measure TD if you don't want to spend the money on a TD one. That's for sure.
Full transparency. The first every time I've opened Hueforge, I wing it and hope for the best, and it's a surprise of what comes out. But no, when I've seen your content, I've seen you talk about those, and I think it's definitely a cool tool that you have there. That kind of made me curious, and I know that you've shown off your filament display rack, but how many filaments would you say you keep on hand to just experiment with different things?
So the thing with Hueforge, like the thing with 3D printing in general, you don't only collect 3D printers, you also collect a bunch of filament. And with Hueforge, you don't use a lot of filament per print. You're using maybe 12 grams for like really complicated ones. And you don't need a lot of filament per print, but you need a lot of filament colors, each color in the rainbow. And then you need 3 different opacities of those. So like you need an insane amount of filament. Right now, I'm at like a little over 100 spools. Too crazy compared to some people. I know a few people that have crazy like filament rooms, but it's still, I still don't have enough filament. There's always room for more. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, I completely know what you mean, because I don't even do a ton of Hueforge prints, but even just in my general day-to-day of printing, I can't tell you how many times I'll go into my closet and I'm like, I have 6 blues, but none of them are the right blue. So I gotta go buy another version of blue now. So yeah,
that's me with purple.
Now, like on a different end of filament, something that I've seen in your content too is you've done it where you take the plastic bottles. I think you're normally using like Mountain Dew bottles, but you take them and you recycle them back down into filament, which blows my mind every time I see it. When you do that, like how complex is that process, and how is the filament when you actually run it?
My buddy Josh over at the Recreator 3D, he has a bunch of projects where you can basically upcycle an Ender 3, a Prusa Mark 3, any kind of printer that you have, there's probably a kit for it. He's the brains behind that operation. Very cool people, very nice guy. Basically, I took an Ender 3 off of eBay for like $3, and he has all the files on printables and everything, and you just follow it to a T. He has all the prints and everything, and then the instructions are very good. And you build the Recreator, and the Recreator is taking your hot end. You have to drill out a nozzle to like 1.75 millimeters, so the size of most 3D printing filaments. And it uses one of the stepper motors from the Ender 3, and that way it can spool up your spool of Mountain Dew filament. And what's happening is you're cutting the plastic bottles down into strips, into little tiny strips. And when those strips get pulled through the nozzle, it turns into a straw, and then it's wrapped around and you can spool it. So it's PET. Now, we all know PETG. The G stands for glycol. They add glycol to PETG to help with 3D printing. The only thing that you have to do to print with it is turn up the flow and turn up the heat, and it prints pretty well. I gave some away at Rocky Mountain RepRap Festival. I've actually got some 2 liters lined up that I need to turn into some filament. But like I said, I have so many projects right now that it's on the to-do list. More important things first. But yeah, it's definitely a fun process.
I see there's a couple of people I follow online who make their own filament from time to time. I'm always like, oh, sounds great, but it's just one more project to get into.
Yeah, it's and not to mention, there's no real good way to put the ends together. I'm waiting on the Sunlu filament joiner that they just announced. I signed up for the pre-orders. That should be shipping out sometime soon, and we'll see how well that does. A 2-liter bottle only, I forget how many grams, but it's not a lot of filament. So I need to find a decent way to join different 2-liter bottles together. Like I said, it's just the reason that I got into that was because I live in the South, but I live on the Gulf Coast. So I live at the beach. I grew up at the beach. There's a lot of plastic everywhere on the beach, and just being able to recycle and turn those plastic bottles that you find on a beach into filament just sounded like a really cool process. And that kind of got me into wanting to recycle and do that project.
That's super cool. I was like thinking through my head, I'm like, there's no way I drink enough 2 liters of pop over the course of the year to make a single roll of filament. But yeah, no, hearing you say that, it's cool. And I feel like there's always this online trope, at least in my comment section, of people always being like, they're like, oh, you're ruining the world with all of your plastic that you're making. So I guess it's a cool way to counteract the people who think that us 3D printers are slowly ruining the world.
Yeah, there's definitely some waste, but waste comes from other places too, right? Like plastic waste,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
just us.
Yeah, it's funny hearing you say you like grew up spending a lot of time on the beach. I feel like you give off California like surfer vibes, and one of the things that makes me think that like I see in your content sometimes you're like talking about like, skateboarding, longboarding, things like that. And I know that you recently, I think you had done wheels for a longboard that you 3D printed, but then you got a belt printer and you were potentially going to do a full 3D printed longboard. Is that still on the project docket for you?
Yeah, so actually, I was born in SoCal, like Southern California.
Oh,
My whole
okay.
family just migrated out here whenever I was a baby. A lot of my roots are from Southern California, and I still have grandparents that live out there, so I'll go visit. But yeah, the longboard, like I said, when I was growing up, that was one of those things. Like I grew up painting longboards, and one of my uncles had a wood shop, and he made custom longboards and stuff like that for
Oh,
us. And
cool.
so that was definitely one of the things, one of the hobbies growing up. When I got into 3D printing, I found out about TPU. I was like, it's just polyurethane, and that's what the wheels are made out of anyway. So could we 3D print some wheels? And I found a file on Colts, and those are the ones that I printed out, the pink ones that I did. Polymaker came out with the dry box, the poly dryer. And in their video for the poly dryer, they showed somebody 3D printing longboard trucks. I talked to their community manager. I was like, hey, can I get the files for that? Because they hadn't uploaded them anywhere. And I got those. So I printed those out of nylon. I've tested both of them. They work great. And then really the day after that I posted my video, I think it was the day after, Overture, Greg over at Overture, he posted a video of his longboard wheels. It was like crazy timing because I hadn't seen anybody else ever posting longboard
Yeah.
wheels. And his were green, mine were pink. So at 3D Printopia recently, I got to meet him in person and we traded 2 for 2. So now I have Cosmo and Wanda type longboard setup. The belt printer I got from a friend. He sent it to me because I reached out on Twitter and I was like, does anybody have a belt printer? Because I was just going to pay them to print the board, the design for
Yeah.
me and send it to me. And he was like, hey, I've got this board or this printer sitting in my garage. Do you want it? And I was like, yes, please send it to me. And so when he sent it to me, tested UPS things, and that thing is, there's some parts that are bent. There's the power cord is all frayed.
Oh
So
no.
there's going to be some replacement parts that need to be done before I could even start on that project, but it's definitely coming at some point. I want to do a Hueforge on the bottom of it. I think that would be
Oh,
really
that'd be
cool.
so cool.
Yeah.
No, I'm excited to see that project. I always have this like weird misconception, or maybe just because I've seen, or maybe from my prints or seeing other people do. And I always assumed that you couldn't make something on a 3D printer that you could like, use in day-to-day life. But it sounds, did those wheels hold up for you? It sounded like from what I heard in your videos, like they were fine and they worked.
They're great. We didn't test them on any crazy downhills. There's some around my buddy's house, but as far as the holding up from durability standpoint, yeah, they definitely held up fine. We did a bunch of power slides. Greg didn't do any in his video, but I was like, we're trying to break these wheels. Please do what you can to try to break them down. And yeah, so they held up pretty well.
Coming back to your printers, one of the cool things that I've seen you have recently, sometimes on the bottom of your Hueforge prints, sometimes on other prints, but you have this custom build plate. It has your logo on it and it embosses your logo right onto the bottom of the prints. Did you make that or where did that come from?
One of my buddies, new friend, Phil, over at Ember Prototypes, he does these custom build plates for all kinds of 3D printers. I just so happened to find out about him early on because he was talking to Steve from Hueforge. And so I went over and talked to Steve and asked him about it because he had ordered some Hueforge plates. I got my hands on them after I talked to Phil about doing some custom plates. And he has some really good pricing for these custom plates. You just take an SVG of your logo and send it to him. He can either do like a giant logo on the middle of the plate, or he can do a bunch of little ones that are raised. That way, whenever you print, it embosses on the bottom. And that's really helpful for me as selling stuff that I don't have to have an actual signature modeled into my models. I can just print it on those and sell it that way.
Yeah, you do this really cool art of, I think you mostly do 90s cars. Is that your main interest of like aero cars, would you say?
Japanese cars from the 90s definitely have
Yeah.
a special place in my heart. I grew up watching Tokyo Drift, Fast and Furious. That was by far my favorite Fast and Furious movie. I've always been into drifting and Need for Speed Underground, like those kinds of video games and stuff. And when I was in the car scene, it always felt wrong to own a Camaro because like all of my other cars had been Japanese cars and stuff like that up to that point. So Yeah, I don't. But yeah, that's definitely where my heart lies. But I've been doing I did some muscle cars, some modern muscle cars. And then right now I'm working on like German cars, BMWs, stuff like that. And then the Teslas. And then I'll circle back around because there's so many different cars. Everybody keeps requesting different cars. It's never ending.
Did you grow up drawing? Did you grow up like doing digital art? How did you kind of like, how did you know that you could do this and start getting into that side of things?
So back in the day, I'd say like kindergarten, I drew really mean stick figures. No,
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. So like anywhere from any time in grade school, we had really good art teachers where I was in elementary school. And I always entered into art contests at local art fairs and stuff and was top three and stuff like that. And then that transitioned into middle school. I stopped drawing in high school and didn't really get back into it until I found Hueforge again. I mean, I had it from the merch business, but I didn't really get into it until I got an iPad. And yeah, I've been drawing forever, pretty much. A new thing is 3D modeling. I've started getting into Nomad, and that's been super fun, especially because you can do like hybrid Hueforges where it's a mix of a traditional 3D model and a Hueforge to where it looks like it's popping out of the Hueforge. So there's a lot of cool things that you can do with that. And yeah, me and some friends started a book club. We call it a book club for Nomad Sculpt. Each week we have a different prompt that we'll sculpt and make because we're all relatively new to the app. We all wanted to learn it together. And that's turned into, I think we have 15 people in there that just show helpful videos and help each other out. And that's helped a lot because I'm sure learning like Blender or Fusion or any of these modeling apps or sculpting apps or whatever you have, it is daunting to say the least whenever you first get into even Hueforge. It's very, what am I doing? You know what I mean? Blender, trying to do a donut for the first time was, oh my God, not fun. So having that support group is definitely helpful.
Nothing has humbled me as much as getting into 3D modeling softwares because I don't know about you, but there's been so many times where I'll be working on something and I don't pull back enough because I'll be working on it for a half an hour, 45 minutes, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, this is looking great. And I turn it from a different angle. I'm like, whoa, this is wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think even for me, just sometimes I'm like very trying to get my hands to modeling, and I mostly do in Nomad Sculpt when I do, but even just, I think sometimes knowing like what tool to use in what situation, like the best way to approach what you're trying to make is one of the hardest things for me in 3D modeling.
Especially because there's not just one way to tackle any problem in 3D modeling. Like you can use a variety of different brushes or a variety of different tools that these applications have to get the same result. So it's just finding what's best for you or what workflow makes the most sense to you for sure.
Now, you touched on it a couple of times, your merch business. What kind of initially, like, how did you initially get into doing that?
If you were on TikTok back in COVID days, there were a lot of get rich quick doing stickers and t-shirts. That was a very common theme going around the internet. So I got a vinyl cutter and a really nice printer and started doing stickers and then started doing my own print on demand t-shirts. I just didn't go anywhere. By that time, the same kind of designs were in Zoomies and Hot Topics and all these big brand stores. So it was just like, yeah, I sunk all this money into this stuff. I don't need to get out. Like, I don't think I'm going to be able to compete. So it definitely made me fall back. It was a failed business, but you learn from it. And that was the biggest thing. I learned a lot from that business and what to not do when it comes to the 3D printing business and stuff like that. So,
Yeah. I think I've had more failed businesses than I can count at this point. Totally relatable. A lot of times in the past, like print on demand was like one of the first opportunities that I had found like online that I right away I was like, oh man, this is it. This is a cool next thing. Slightly different path there, but definitely relatable. Back when I was really young, I actually worked, one of my first jobs was working at like a physical print t-shirt shop. We actually did like similar. We had like a direct to garment printer back then, and we were working with all these artists, and it's definitely, even when I think back to it, maybe like 10 plus years ago, it was like competitive then. So I can't even imagine during COVID when everybody was home, it had to be treacherous waters during that time.
it just didn't go anywhere. It was like, yeah, maybe this wasn't the get rich quick scheme that I thought it was going to be, right? Yeah, learned some things.
But what you do now, like I said, it's super cool. I feel like I don't see a lot of people like your prints and what you make. It's so easy when I see a video come up, like I instantly know it's yours. It's very recognizable. And I think that that's always something that I really like about certain creators when I can just see their stuff and I instantly know it's theirs. As we wrap up here, I know you have so many projects in the background that you have in the back of your mind that are either halfway through wanting to do. Is there any outstanding project that for you, you just maybe haven't started, maybe aren't quite ready to start it, but definitely want to do at some point?
So I have the two things that are always on the back of my mind are one, the Nomad Sculpting group. Every week we're putting out a model. I'm trying to get quicker at doing Nomad Sculpt, and that's helped a lot with being proficient in it. And then just drawing cars in general. Those are the two main projects weekly that I have in the back of my head. As far as like big projects that are coming up, the jacket with all the TPU patches, that's going to be a big project because like I said, it's very manual and you have to really babysit a printer. So that's definitely going to be fun. And then I just got a resin printer, so I'm excited to see what all I can do with that. But yeah, those are the two main things that I've kept in the back of my head. As far as huge projects, I don't think I have anything crazy big. It's just a bunch of little projects here and there that add up.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm excited to see your upcoming projects, what you have working on. For anyone out there, for whatever reason, they're not following you yet, but they want to, where can they find you online and what are you working on these days?
So you can find me on YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, all on my Linktree /NeoKoi Prints. I do all kinds of short form content. I do long form content for Hueforge to teach beginners how to use Hueforge. And shortly, I'll be doing more general 3D printing content over there. But yeah, that's where you can find me. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them, DM me, whatever. If you have any questions about Hueforge or anything that I do in 3D printing, feel free. I'm always here to chat.
Awesome, Danny. Again, thank you so much for telling us about all the stuff that you're working on for Hueforge and everything else. It's a pleasure talking to you. And with that said, that is Meet the Makers.